All right, so next I'd like to welcome to the stage Tamara Brincat. Tamara is coming to us from the Severn Sound Environmental Association. After graduating from the University of Guelph with a Bachelor's of Science, majoring in Biological Science, and the completion of her graduate certificate from Niagara College in Ecosystem Restoration, Tamara began with the Severn Sound Environmental Association in 2020. Today, Tamara's presentation will provide insight into how the SSEA developed a coordinated approach with 8 partner municipalities to reduce the impacts of invasive species across jurisdictions and highlight some of the challenges and successes of watershed-scale invasive species initiatives. So without further ado, I'd really like to welcome Tamara to our virtual stage, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Emily. Good afternoon, everyone. Give me a moment here to share my screen. As Emily was saying, my name is Tamara Brincat. I am the Invasive Species Program Coordinator at the Severn Sound Environmental Association, or the SSEA for short. So today I will be discussing how we at SSEA tackle invasive species on a watershed scale, including a brief example through one of our case studies. And today I'm virtually joining you from Barrie, Ontario. So I'll start off here just by giving you a bit of background on who SSEA is. So the Severn Sound Environmental Association, or SSEA, is a joint municipal service board, which is a very unique structure and one of a kind within Ontario and even Canada. We operate in the Severn Sound watershed area, and our core funding comes from our 8 municipal partners. We offer environmental services to our municipal partners, and this includes anything from stewardship, project facilitation, climate action plans, environmental monitoring, and many more. So to simplify that, we essentially act as the environmental and sustainability arm of our partner municipalities. And to further help orient you, the Severn Sound watershed is located in the Great Lakes region. So shown in the photo on the right, you can see in that red box there, the watershed is located on southeastern Georgian Bay Lake Huron, and it's approximately 1,000 square kilometers, which supports a diverse range of ecosystems and areas. This is including Great Lakes coastal dunes, shorelines, provincially significant wetlands, inland lakes, forests, agricultural, rural, and semi-urban areas. Majority of the watershed falls within the county of Simcoe. However, a small portion of the watershed is located in the district of Muskoka. And the SSEA area is in close proximity to major urban centers like Toronto and Barrie, and we're a significant source of seasonal tourism, boating, and a cottage destination. As we know, tourism and all of those things that I mentioned can facilitate the introduction of invasive species. So unfortunately, majority of our habitats within this area are at risk of colonization from invasive species. So one of the services that SSEA offers to our partners is our invasive species program, which is why I'm here today. So the core actions of this invasive species program include prevention, monitoring, management, and education related to invasive species, of course, both aquatic and terrestrial. Through this program, we offer support monitoring and detection programs for invasive species, some being species specific, and then we also have broad programs where we do inventories of invasive species within given areas. We also use this monitoring data to assess regional impact and prioritize management of some of the higher impact invaders. And then another thing that we do is collaboration with local, provincial, and national organizations and experts. Collaboration and data sharing is one of the key components of our initiative. And on a more local level, we partner with various organizations and community groups to help increase engagement and stewardship within Severn Sound. And then on a broader scale, we collaborate with organizations such as the Ontario Invasive Plant Council to seek out best management practices and novel research in the field. And then lastly, another large component of our invasive species program is the education piece, which is to educate municipal representatives and the community, as well as empower them to take action against invasive species. So a little bit of history about the program. It began in 2017 with the goal to coordinate the effort of local municipalities to reduce the impact of invasive species. And at that time, only 4 out of our 8 member municipalities participated. And then jumping ahead to 2020, the program expanded to all 8 of our municipalities. And then since then, we've been working in partnership with these municipalities to manage invasive species. Our municipalities understand and support the joint watershed approach to address invasive species concern. And we know invasive species do not respect regulatory boundaries, including municipal. So I just wanted to point out some of the highlights of our program. So one of them being, since it started, the detection of over 70 different invasive species across the watershed. So not only invasive plants, but we also look at invertebrates, insects, fish, and wildlife. We also host a biannual invasive species working group. These meetings are where municipal representatives and local organizations can share information and resources and any experience managing invasive species, as well as collaborating on initiatives. We've also developed an invasive species strategy for our watershed with the goal of facilitating a community-based and coordinated approach to invasive species. And just to give you an example, in 2021 alone, even with some of the COVID challenges, we facilitated or participated in 13 community-based management events with over 100 volunteers. And at even one of these events, we did 1,900 pounds of Phragmites removal. And then lastly, we produce educational materials that not only benefit the Severn Sound area, but we've seen them referenced across North America. And then from my own personal experience, one of the benefits of our organizational structure in this specific program is helping to create a sense of community and promote stewardship and really getting to know volunteers. As much as we do have highlights of the program, we also experience our challenges. So SSEA is quite a small organization. We have less than 10 full-time staff. And of course, because of this, we face a number of challenges working at such a large watershed scale and with so many different community groups and stakeholders. And so one of the challenges, of course, is reporting results to these stakeholders. Additionally, we, as many of you will probably already know and experience, we have difficulty securing funding for invasive species specific projects. And then another challenge that we face is prioritizing invasive species. So our priorities pretty much change from year to year based on public interest and location and monitoring results. And with limited resources, we don't complete broad scale management programs or initiatives and often have to pick a few target species or areas to focus our resources on. And then I think everyone's been experiencing this over the past few years with COVID, but volunteer engagement, it's difficult to do community and in-person events at this point. So now I'm going to share a more specific example of an ongoing invasive species project involving giant hogweed. Giant hogweed is considered one of our priority invasive species within the watershed, mainly because of its concern to human health. And if you are not familiar with giant hogweed, it contains phototoxic sap, meaning that if you come in contact with the plant and then expose yourself to sunlight, you can experience severe burning and blistering on your skin. We have documented this particular species within several municipalities within our watershed. The focus, however, of this case study will be on the Utah Trail, which is located in the township of Severn. So the Utah Trail is a former rail trail, and it's a small portion of the Trans-Canada Trail that runs between Wabashine and Orillia. It's a rural trail that is approximately 30 kilometers in length and is used for recreational purposes such as walking, horseback riding, and cross-country skiing. Along this trail, 11 sites have been identified just alone in 2021 with giant hogweed. So of these sites, majority are located along stream banks adjacent to the trail, and others are near agricultural areas or public parks. One of the biggest concerns with the location of these plants is that they are getting dangerously close to the trail, to the point where some of the younger plants are half a meter from the trail side. And if a person or pet were to veer slightly off the trail, they could potentially encounter hogweed without even knowing. And then in addition to this, there are some unauthorized trails that go right through hogweed populations. And then another concern is that many of the trail users may not be able to identify hogweed or know the danger of this plant at its mature stage, let alone some of the smaller plants that we see. And lastly, some of these plants are moving on to private property, and working with landowners to manage hogweed on their own property can be a challenge. When the municipality first recognized that this was a problem, they didn't have the in-house expertise to identify the species or prepare a management plan. So around 2017, when the Invasive Species Program began, the Township of Severn worked with SSEA to begin developing and implementing a management program for giant hogweed along this specific trail. And the goal of this was to reduce the size of the current infestations and prevent further spread along the trail and onto adjacent parks and property. So the program, this particular program involved doing surveillance monitoring to identify locations, identify most suitable management methods for these sites, and provide some public communication and signage for trail users. The primary control method that was used was herbicide, which was contracted out to a licensed exterminator. And now the program is still ongoing, and annually we do pre and post treatment assessments. So now in terms of what this means for a watershed scale. So like I said before, this particular case study focused on the Township of Severn. However, within our watershed, other municipalities have been working to manage hogweed along with other invasive species. And to date, we have not observed hogweed on other portions of the Trans-Canada Trail that fall within our watershed, luckily. But the trail systems continue to into adjacent municipalities, which obviously serves as a vector of spread for invasive species. And we want to be vigilant when it comes to hogweed and other invasive species monitoring to ensure that it's not spreading. And obviously a key component to preventing further spread is regular communication amongst these municipalities, along with sharing resources and experiences with management. So now returning back to where SSEA fits into this. So SSEA's primary role is to facilitate the communication between municipalities. We also facilitate the prevention, monitoring, and management, and provide a way of reporting for the general public. And this is through our citizen science program. We also provide technical expertise and management guidance to our municipalities and partner organizations. And then lastly, we provide that piece of communication to the public. So I just wanted to share a list of some of the partnerships with community groups and local organizations, along with provincial and federal agencies that we partner with. So on that note, I'll say thank you for listening to me talk about my watershed scale invasive species management. I provided a brief snapshot of the work that SSEA does, but I have added some contact information on the slide, so feel free to reach out to us on social media or directly by email if you would like to know more. And thanks to the OIPC for hosting today's conference and letting me speak here today. And I would be happy to take any questions.
So in your presentation, you're talking a lot about the education part about the management of the giant hogweed. I don't remember if you were saying that there's actually initiatives to remove it since it is quite a problematic weed. Is there anything that you guys are involved with in terms of getting this removed, or you're more just like the link between municipalities, trying to get management action across the different municipalities?
So our primary role is to provide the management guidance. So there is circumstances where we do on the ground management with other invasive species, but with this one in particular, for most of the sites that it's on, and not mechanical treatment, but herbicide treatment seems to be working the best and the best solution. We don't do any mechanical management of hogweed as of right now, just because of the safety concerns, but for this particular site along the Utah Trail, they do hire a contractor to apply herbicides in the various locations. And that's not something we do ourselves, that's the municipality, but we kind of facilitate that process. So I see a couple questions. There's one about native cow parsnip and invasive wild parsnip. Yeah, we do have both of those species in the area. There's no, I would say, broad scale or targeted management program. I think that's kind of something that we're working towards with a few of the different noxious weed species. Right now, from my knowledge, the municipalities are kind of doing individual efforts towards things like wild parsnip.
Are there any infrastructure controls that you have found work well on the trails to encourage trail users to prevent the spread of hogweed?
Yeah, I think signage is probably one of the best tools. We do have a lot of significant wetlands, specifically along that trail, and there's a lot of signage that's there anyways, and it seems to be pretty popular. So we're working towards getting more hogweed signage up along the trails, just to get people aware that it is there and how to identify it and the dangers of it. We're also working to get boot brushing stations at various locations across the trail, but obviously that's a whole other funding issue too. So that's something that we're hopeful for the future.
Do you run into a lot of trouble with people confusing giant hogweed for wild parsnip?
Absolutely. We have people sending us photos of wild carrot, or Queen Anne's lace is the other name for it, and thinking that that's giant hogweed. So people, I would say, definitely aren't aware of distinguishing the difference between the carrot family, including giant hogweed, wild parsnip, wild carrot, all species like that. So that's something that we're also working towards. And actually, we did a little bit of an educational campaign to try and encourage people to watch videos and check out fact sheets and resources, and on social media as well, to learn the difference between the species and learn which ones are more dangerous than others.
How did the group start? What brought the first 4 municipalities together?
So the SSEA formed, I believe, and I'm not familiar with the full history because I've only been with SSEA for a short period, but I believe the SSEA started in the 90s with the intention of implementing the remedial action plan. So the invasive species program was something that's relatively new to SSEA, and the reason that it began was because our municipalities understood and recognized the need for a watershed scale approach rather than individual efforts. So they basically wanted the SSEA to do that for them because they didn't have the in-house expertise.
So what do you think the driver was that changed the participation municipalities from 4 at the onset to all 8 of them in 2020? Also, they provide funding for the SSEA on the ground management.
So to answer the first part of that question, I think the real driver was recognizing some of these more well-known species like Phragmites or the LDD moth, and understanding that there's a need for education, there's a need for management and monitoring programs. And again, it seemed more efficient to put their money into one place rather than to try and do it on their own. And that's partially communication amongst each municipality. And the other 4 municipalities that I referred to, they were already participating in some of SSEA's other environmental programs. So I think they started to understand the benefit with regard to invasive species specifically. And then the second part of that question, the funding for the on-the-ground management. Basically, in our core budget, it's kind of included as like a one-liner, just invasive species program. It's not separated out, but yeah, there's definitely an on-the-ground management piece. We don't really have the staffing to do a lot of labor work ourselves, but we often recruit volunteer groups and promote volunteering and community events so that we can kind of increase our efforts.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. It was a really interesting presentation.